Zak Bagans has spent 20 years locking himself inside the most dangerous locations on Earth and putting what the cameras captured in front of an audience. But the broadcast version of Ghost Adventures was never the complete record. Travel Channel has been sitting on footage that Bagans fought to release and was denied every time until now. He has made the decision to leak it himself, and what it contains explains exactly why the network spent years making sure you would never see it. Subscribe and stay until the end. The story of Ghost Adventures does not begin with a network deal or a development meeting. It begins with a 20-something Zak Bagans living in Las Vegas with a consumer camcorder, a conviction that the paranormal phenomenon he had personally experienced was real and documentable, and an absolute absence of institutional support for either of those things. The original Ghost Adventures documentary, filmed in 2004 at the Goldfield Hotel in Nevada and the Virginia City Silver Queen Hotel, was not produced within any professional framework. It was produced by a young man who drove to a location, set up a camera, and locked himself inside overnight with no crew, no safety protocol, and no plan beyond documenting whatever the building produced. What the building produced was enough to change the trajectory of his entire life. The raw documentary circulated in the paranormal research community and eventually reached Travel Channel, which recognized in Bagans something the network had been looking for: a presenter whose engagement with the phenomena he investigated was not performed for the camera, but was viscerally, uncomfortably genuine. The series that launched in 2008 took the foundational premise of the documentary and built a production infrastructure around it. Bagans and his core crew, Nick Groff in the early seasons, Aaron Goodwin throughout, Billy Tolley and Jay Wasley in later years, developed a methodology that separated Ghost Adventures from the crowded paranormal television landscape in a specific and important way. The lockdown format, in which the team sealed themselves inside a location overnight with no outside contact, was not a television gimmick. It was a deliberate investigative choice designed to eliminate the possibility of contamination and to expose the crew to extended periods of uninterrupted contact with whatever phenomenon the location produced. What that exposure did to Bagans personally over 2 decades of sustained practice is something the broadcast episodes have documented in fragments without ever fully accounting for. The physical effects are the most visible part of the record, the documented instances of scratches, burns, and physiological responses that occurred during investigations and were captured on camera without conventional medical explanation. The psychological dimension runs deeper and is less visible in the broadcast material, but more significant in terms of understanding why the leaked footage exists. Bagans has spoken in general terms across multiple interviews about the cumulative effect of decades of direct exposure to extreme paranormal phenomenon, about the way that exposure changes a person's relationship to the world they inhabit and to the frameworks by which most people navigate reality. What he has not spoken about publicly, in any interview or on any platform, is the specific content of the footage Travel Channel suppressed, and what that footage added to the toll the investigations had already taken. The empire Bagans built, the museum, the production company, the 20-season franchise, exists in parallel with a private record of what the investigations actually produced that the public has never been permitted to access. The leaked footage is that record becoming public, and the price Bagans paid to accumulate it is the context without which its contents cannot be fully understood. Every frame of Ghost Adventures footage that has ever reached a broadcast audience passed through an editorial process that Zak Bagans did not control. That fact is not unique to Ghost Adventures. It is the standard operational reality of any television production operating within a network framework. What makes it significant in the context of the leaked footage is the specific pattern of what the Travel Channel editorial process consistently removed across 2 decades of production, and what that pattern reveals about the nature of the network's content management policy. The documented instances of editorial friction between Bagans and Travel Channel are scattered across the public record in fragments, references in interviews to moments that were cut, evidence that was excluded, and conclusions the investigation reached that the network declined to present in their full form. None of those public references has been specific enough to constitute a full account of what was being suppressed. Taken together and mapped against the timeline of the show's production history, they form a pattern that is specific enough to be meaningful. The evidence categories that consistently failed to survive the editorial process, regardless of which investigation produced them, share a common characteristic. They are evidence that does not admit of ambiguity. The Ghost Adventures broadcast episodes have always been built around a specific relationship between the investigation and its conclusions. Anomalies are documented, experts are consulted, conventional explanations are considered and found insufficient, and the episode ends in a place of unresolved but compelling mystery. That structure serves the network's interest in a returning audience. A mystery that is definitively solved does not generate a viewer who comes back next week. What the suppressed footage apparently contains is evidence that is definitively not mysterious. Evidence that is clear enough in what what it documents, that the unresolved mystery structure the show was built on could not accommodate it without collapsing. The contractual framework governing the production gave Travel Channel final authority over every editorial decision, which meant that Bagans' ability to push back against specific cuts was limited to the persuasion he could bring to bear in conversations with network executives who had both the legal authority and the commercial incentive to maintain the editorial status quo. The pattern of those conversations, according to people familiar with the production relationship, was consistent. Bagans would advocate for the inclusion of specific evidence. The network would decline without providing a detailed justification for the decision, and the footage would be removed from the episode without further discussion. That process repeated itself across multiple seasons and multiple investigations until the body of suppressed material had grown large enough and significant enough that Bagans' calculation about the cost of continued compliance shifted. The leaked footage is every instance of that process reaching its endpoint at once. The footage Travel Channel suppressed across the run of Ghost Adventures does not come from a single investigation or a single season. It comes from multiple cases spread across the show's production history, cases that share a specific quality of evidence that triggered the same editorial response each time, despite occurring in different locations, under different conditions, and with different combinations of crew members present. The earliest material in the leaked footage dates to the middle seasons of the show's run, a period in which the production had developed enough operational sophistication to be deploying the full range of investigative technology the show became known for, and in which the locations being investigated had expanded beyond the American properties that dominated the early seasons into international sites with documented histories of anomalous activity that stretch back centuries rather than decades. Several of the international investigations from this period generated footage that never made it to broadcast in any form, not edited down, not reframed as ambiguous evidence, simply removed from the episode entirely and filed in a production archive that the network controlled and Bagans could not access independently. The domestic investigations represented in the leaked material include several locations that did appear in broadcast episodes, cases where the aired version of the episode represents a heavily edited account of an investigation that the raw footage tells a fundamentally different story about. Viewers who watch those broadcast episodes will recognize the locations and the surface-level framing of the investigations. What they will not recognize is the evidence the cameras captured at those locations that the edited version of the episode does not contain, because what the cameras captured goes beyond what the episode presented as its most extreme moment by a margin that cannot be accounted for by normal editorial compression. The locations share no obvious geographic or historical connection that would explain why the phenomenon documented at each of them produced evidence of the same category. They are spread across multiple continents, multiple cultural context, and multiple classes of reported paranormal activity. What they share is what cameras found at each of them, and the consistency of that finding across locations with no surface-level connection to each other is among the most significant elements of the leaked footage considered as a body of evidence rather than as individual clips. The decision Zak Bagans made to release the suppressed footage was not made quickly, and it was not made easily. The people who have been in close proximity to Bagans during the period leading up to the release describe a man who had been moving toward this decision for an extended period of time, working through the professional, legal, and personal implications of breaking with the network that had built his career and deciding, methodically and with full awareness of the consequences, that the cost of continued silence had become greater than the cost of speaking. The specific trigger for the final decision is connected to the most recent body of suppressed footage, material from an investigation conducted within the last several years that Bagans considered the most significant evidence Ghost Adventures had ever produced, and that Travel Channel declined to broadcast in any form without, according to Bagans' account, providing any editorial justification beyond the assertion of their contractual authority to make the call. That response, the network exercising its authority without engaging with the substance of what Bagans was advocating for, was not new. What was new was what the suppressed investigation had produced, and what Bagans understood about the implications of keeping it hidden. The footage from that investigation, which forms the centerpiece of the leaked material, documents a sequence of events that Bagans has described in the limited indirect references he has made to it, as the moment the investigation of paranormal phenomenon stopped being an open question for him. Not a moment that deepened the mystery, a moment that resolved it, and the resolution it produced was not one that Travel Channel was willing to put in front of an audience regardless of how Bagans framed the editorial conversation. The professional relationship between Bagans and Travel Channel had been built on a specific implicit agreement that the network would broadcast the investigation, and Bagans would accept the editorial framework that the network imposed on how that investigation was presented. The suppression of footage that Bagans considered definitive rather than ambiguous broke that agreement from Bagans' perspective in a way the prior pattern of editorial cuts had not. Prior cuts had shaped the presentation of evidence that was genuinely open to interpretation. The suppression of the most recent material was the suppression of evidence that was not. That distinction was the line Bagans had apparently drawn for himself without articulating it as such, and the network's decision to cross it was the decision that made the leak inevitable. The leaked footage opens with material that Ghost Adventures viewers will recognize as consistent with the show's established investigative style: the location establishment, the crew deployment, the baseline readings. What it contains beyond that baseline is what Travel Channel spent years ensuring no audience would see. The earliest sequence in the leaked material comes from an international investigation conducted during the middle period of the show's run at a location whose documented history of paranormal activity predates the modern era by several centuries. The broadcast episode from that investigation presented a compelling but ultimately ambiguous account of anomalous activity. The suppressed footage from the same investigation documents a sequence that occurred in the final hours of the lockdown, after the cameras had been running for an extended period and the crew had moved into the deepest section of the location, in which something became visible on multiple camera feeds simultaneously that no post-production analysis has been able to attribute to any equipment artifact, lighting condition, or environmental factor present at the site. It is visible on 3 independent camera feeds at the same time. It responds to direct address from Bagans in a manner that the footage documents clearly enough that the response is not a matter of interpretation, and it is present in the location for an uninterrupted period of time long enough that its presence cannot be attributed to a momentary instrument anomaly or a transient visual disturbance. The second major sequence in the leaked material comes from a domestic investigation at a location that did not appear in any broadcast episode, a site the production visited and then apparently made a decision not to associate publicly with the show at all. What the cameras captured at that location during a specific 40-minute window of the lockdown is the sequence that people who have seen the full leaked footage have described with the greatest consistency and the greatest difficulty. The physical environment of the location changed during that window in a manner that the footage documents across every camera feed running at the time. A change that is not subtle, not ambiguous, and not attributable to any conventional explanation that the production's technical team has been able to generate in the years since the footage was recorded. The third sequence, the most recent material and the material Bagans has described as the reason he made the decision to release, documents the investigation that finally broke the implicit agreement between the investigator and the network. What it contains is the question the entire 20-year catalog of Ghost Adventures was building toward, answered on camera in a way that no editorial framework could have contained without lying about what the footage shows. Presented individually, each sequence in the leaked footage would represent the most significant paranormal evidence Ghost Adventures ever produced. Presented as a body of evidence accumulated across multiple investigations spanning a significant portion of the show's production history, they demonstrate something that goes beyond any individual case and into the territory of a systematic finding, a conclusion that the investigations were converging toward across years of fieldwork at locations with no surface-level connection to each other. The first analytical question applied to paranormal footage is always the question of authenticity, whether what the cameras appear to show is what was actually present at the location, or whether it is the product of equipment artifact, post-production manipulation, or deliberate staging. The leaked footage has been subjected to independent digital forensics analysis by 2 separate firms whose findings are consistent with each other and unambiguous in their conclusions. The footage has not been altered. The anomalies visible across the multiple camera feeds in each sequence are not post-production composites. The physical evidence of environmental changes documented in the second major sequence is consistent across every recording device running at the time, in a manner that rules out individual equipment malfunction as an explanation. What the cameras show is what was present at the locations when the cameras were rolling. The second analytical question is the question of conventional explanation, whether what the footage documents can be accounted for within the existing frameworks of physics, biology, psychology, or any other established discipline. This is where the leaked material's significance becomes impossible to contain within any conventional analytical framework the relevant disciplines currently possess. The simultaneous multi-feed visibility of the phenomenon documented in the first sequence eliminates the range of perceptual and psychological explanations that are typically applied to single-witness paranormal accounts. You cannot explain away something that 3 independent cameras recorded at the same time by reference to the perceptual state of the observer. The environmental changes documented in the second sequence have been reviewed by a structural engineer and 2 environmental scientists whose independent assessments are consistent in finding no conventional explanation for what the footage shows happening to the physical space of the location during the relevant window. The third sequence, the most recent material, has not been subjected to the same same breadth of independent analysis because its contents are of a character that makes the question of conventional explanation beside the point. What it documents does not require scientific analysis to establish that it falls outside the range of anything the existing scientific literature accounts for. It requires only watching, and the fact that its implications are visible rather than requiring expert interpretation to access, is the most significant thing about it, and the most direct explanation for why Travel Channel buried it. The surface explanation for why Travel Channel suppressed the Ghost Adventures footage is the one that applies to any network making a content decision about material it considers too extreme for its audience. Liability concerns, advertiser sensitivity, the risk of broadcasting evidence that invites a level of public scrutiny the network is not equipped to manage. That explanation is available and it is not entirely wrong, but it does not account for the totality of the suppression. Networks pull content for commercial reasons all the time, and when they do, the decision is made within a normal operational timeline by people operating within their standard professional roles. The suppression of the Ghost Adventures footage did not follow that pattern. The speed of the decisions, the totality of the removal, not edited, not reframed, gone, and the complete absence of any editorial justification offered to Bagans beyond the assertion of contractual authority all indicate that the people making the suppression decisions were not making them purely on the basis of commercial calculation. They were making them on the basis of something they had been told or shown that made the commercial calculation irrelevant. The history of institutional interest in paranormal phenomenon at the governmental level is now sufficiently documented in the public record that it does not require speculation to invoke. The AAW-SAP program, the AATIP program, and the series of congressional hearings and intelligence community disclosures that have accumulated over the past decade have collectively established that agencies operating at federal level have maintained active research programs focused on anomalous phenomenon for decades. Those programs have a documented interest in managing what enters the public record about phenomena they study. Ghost Adventures, across 20 seasons of investigation at locations spread across multiple continents, has been operating in the same evidential territory those programs have been monitoring. The intersection of those two facts, the institutional interest in managing disclosure and the Ghost Adventures footage documenting evidence of the category those institutions monitor, is the most direct explanation for why the suppression of the leaked material went beyond what commercial television networks typically do with content they find inconvenient. Travel Channel did not make the decision to bury this footage alone, and the entity that helped them make it has a much longer history of burying this kind of evidence than any cable network does. The professional consequences of Zak Bagans releasing the suppressed footage without network authorization are not ambiguous. The contractual framework governing the Ghost Adventures production gives Travel Channel remedies for exactly this kind of unilateral disclosure, and the network's response to the leak will define the future of a franchise that has been one of the most commercially successful productions in paranormal television history. Bagans made this decision knowing all of that. The people close to him during the period leading up to the release described someone who had done the full accounting of what the leak would cost and concluded that the ledger came out the same way regardless of how many times he ran the numbers. What the suppressed footage documents is evidence he considers the public's right to see. The professional cost of releasing it is real and he will bear it. The professional cost of continuing to sit on it, of knowing what the footage contains and choosing institutional compliance over disclosure had become something he was no longer able to pay. For Ghost Adventures as a franchise, the implications extend beyond the legal and contractual situation Bagans now occupies. 20 seasons of broadcast episodes exist in a context that the leaked footage fundamentally alters. The audience that watched those episodes understood them as the complete account of what the investigations produced. They were not. Every broadcast episode that covered a location represented in the leaked material was a partial account, a version of the investigation from which the most significant evidence had been removed before the audience was permitted to see it. That realization does not diminish what the broadcast episodes contain. It reframes it. The anomalous evidence that made it through the editorial process and onto television was the portion of the record Travel Channel was willing to show. The leaked footage is the portion they were not. Taken together, they constitute the full record of what Ghost Adventures actually documented across 2 decades of investigation. That full record is now in the world, and for Zak Bagans, the man who built everything around the conviction that the phenomenon was real and the evidence deserved to be seen, the leak is not the end of something. It is the first moment in 20 years that the investigation has been allowed to speak for itself without someone else's hand on the edit. 20 years, hundreds of investigations, an entire franchise built on documenting the truth and then watching the truth get cut before anyone could see it. The leaked footage is not the end of Ghost Adventures. It is the first honest episode it has ever produced. Travel Channel buried the evidence because the evidence was too final. It is not buried anymore. Zak Bagans went looking for proof and spent 2 decades being told the world was not ready. He has decided it is. So has the footage, and so should you.